This is called the SARM2. Why? Why do people insist on bringing toddlers and little kids out here if they're not going to watch them constantly? I mean, I can't imagine the level of negligence that will lead to your fucking 2-year-old wandering off and falling down a goddamn ravine. Fun fact, when someone's skull is shattered, it rumbles when you move it. It's kind of like broken pottery sliding around. I'm sorry, I haven't been around much. Here are a few things I think you guys might like. I have a buddy down in Deschutes County who is a veteran PR. About 2 years ago, he was spending the summer in a fire tower, and it was an unusually dry summer, so obviously he's on high alert. Now, his particular fire tower overlooked this one particular area, and there is a link to a JPEG that we'll give you. One night around 6 or so, he was out the balcony and looking around the area through binoculars. About a mile out, he thought. He saw something moving. Someone was walking along a trail that skirted the base of the mountains. It's a guy. Appeared to be in his late 50s, full beard, heavy gut. He moved along at a slow but steady pace, and unfortunately for him, he was in a no-go area. So my friend reached for his radio to call in and request another PR to intercept him. But it wasn't on his hip where he usually kept it, so he lowered the binoculars to look around, found it, attempted to relocate the man. All standard issue stuff. He found the area the man had been in. The guy was gone. Now, my friend, not unreasonably, he is puzzled, and he's worried too. Had he fallen? Was he hurt? He scanned all around, but there was absolutely no trace of the guy. He lowered his binoculars, but as he did so, there was a flash of red. He raised them, and the entire field was full of a shifting red, and he could make literally no sense of what he was seeing. Of course, eventually he figured it out. And when he did, he looked up, and the man was no more than 100 yards away, still walking with that same slow pace. My friend went into what I would guess was a mild state of shock, because this situation, to be explicit, was impossible. He remembers freezing. He remembers being forced to watch the man come closer to the base of the tower. And he remembers that there was something wrong with his eyes. They were looking down, but so far down that only the very, very tips of the irises were visible. That's how close he got before he stopped. Just below the balcony, he craned his head up, but his eyes did not move. And he opened his mouth but didn't say anything for a moment. And then his jaw moved up and down a bit. And he said, "I saw you." The man's irises started to roll up. Just as they were about to make eye contact, my friend managed to break his paralysis, and he just booked it into the cabin. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and the man was there so fast my friend said he couldn't even register it. He tapped on the glass, and my friend refused to look at him. He turned his back and waited for the thing to go away. My friend believes that turning your back on a demon or other unholy thing will force it to leave. And I guess in this instance, he was right, because the thing eventually left. My friend stayed out there for the rest of the summer, somehow. He locked the doors at night. It's probably some kind of really weird refraction from a lake, or a kind of mirage, but there's been a little cluster of sightings that I thought were interesting. They happened in the same place and at the same time, but on different days. Universally, the reports basically described the observer hiking up to a scenic viewing spot and seeing something up above the horizon, higher up than a mirage would normally be, almost at eye level. When viewed with plain sight, it was impossible to tell what it was, but it was obviously stationary. When viewed with magnification, it was possible to make out someone suspended in the air, upside down, hands at his sides. There was a teenage kid that was part of one of these groups, and they compared it to those glitches where you can see through walls and the NPCs are just standing around in weird places in T-pose in video games. Like I said, we're pretty sure it's a weird mirage from a lake, or possibly even some stupid prank, but we're keeping an eye on it. Hey, do you ever have a memory you can't remember, but you can remember remembering it? Oh god, it's driving me crazy. There was a big case, down south, a few months ago. Uncle from a prominent local family went out hunting, did not come back. The theory was he'd fallen into a sinkhole, since he'd been popping up in the area with the unusually heavy rainfall we'd had. Even though the search was largely conducted with this in mind, though, it took a long time to find him, and it didn't help that by the time they did, his legs were gone. He was the victim of one of the absolute dumbest fucking accidents I've ever seen. oh boy, one of those things that'll happen once and never again. This poor guy tripped on an exposed root and fell forward, and when he reached out to catch himself, he had the unfortunate luck of breaking through into a sinkhole. It wasn't particularly deep, but unbeknownst to him, it had a second entrance at the base of a tree 50 yards away. Unfortunately, the sinkhole was occupied, and he landed awkwardly on his wrists into a pile of diamondbacks. The guy survived long enough to feel one puncture his eye and another, we think, bite through his lip, but not much longer than that. So stuck almost vertically, the venom basically mainlined straight to his brain, and he died before he could figure out a way to escape. It goes down, in my mind at least, as one of the most idiotic, senseless ways for someone to die that I have ever heard of. And now tea.
That's just nasty.
Yeah.
Bite to the eye.
Snaketality. Yes. This is SAR Mountains. Okay. All right. Now that I'm not confined anymore to a plot-driven box, I can go back to telling stories the way I like to, or I guess the way he likes to. Russell had an accident. It was pretty bad. I'm not sure when he's going to be back on here. He's got some bad motor problems now, and I guess the therapy takes a long time. He would prefer to tell you guys about the accident himself when he gets back. So I'm going to leave it at that. In the meantime, he wants me to talk to you guys a little about what I do and what kind of things I've seen. I guess he's got this project going about the stairs. I haven't read most of the posts. He told me what kind of things you guys are interested in, though, and I've spent some time thinking about it and coming up with a bunch. Russell said to make a large post, so I'll make this one a good length if I can. Edit. I can't figure out the bullet points, I'm really sorry. So it's just going to be a big paragraph. I'm KD, by the way. Hi. Okay, well, first off, I really want to thank Russell for mentioning tree wells and all sorts of other stuff. What I want people to take away from all of this, more than anything, is that you need to take this stuff really seriously. We're not kidding when we tell you to bring survival gear for even brief hikes or climbs, and if you're a free climber, well, this story is for you. 2 kids were out free climbing at a park I used to work at in Central Oregon. Of course... Oregon.
No, Oregon.
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 Thank you.
2 kids were out free climbing at a park I used to work at in Central Oregon. Of course, doing that... What?
I'm sorry. It's Oregon?
Oregon.
Correct.
Okay. 2 kids were free climbing... Sorry, give me a moment.
Yeah, because you said it like Oregon, and they're all like, oh god, that's...
Is that Central Oregon?
Central Oregon. Oh, right. Fine, you may call it Central Oregon. Let's move on.
2 kids were out free climbing at a park I used to work at in Central Oregon. Of course, doing that is completely forbidden, but they were in a pretty remote area of the park, and it was still pretty early in the spring for most climbers. The morning they were out, I remember there being a layer of ice on everything, but it was almost totally invisible. See, that just happens sometimes. It's the way the frost freezes, or if there's a little rain overnight. And I remember seeing this and thinking it was going to be a bad day. Anyway, these kids were scaling up a cliff face and they hit a spot that must have been in the shade. That layer of frost was probably still there. They fell from about the same height, which also leads me to think they literally couldn't grip onto the rock. Their fingernails were broken from dragging them as they fell. They were conscious the whole way down. They had time to think about how they were going to die. They had time to wonder if it would hurt. The first kid landed on his feet. How, I have no idea. And both tibia and fibula shattered. The force drove his femurs up through his body cavity and into his ribs, pushing his stomach up into his throat, tearing through everything else in its path. He didn't die right away. He dragged himself about 2 feet before collapsing. His friend landed on his upper back and neck, which drove his chin into his chest with enough force to shatter his jaw and sternum. Pieces of bone ripped through his heart, but if that hadn't killed him, the impact of the back of his head would have. The bleeding was catastrophic and caused his now bright red eyes to bulge out of his skull, and they were 15. I specialize in mountain rescues, and a lot of what I do is pick up bodies. If you get in trouble on a mountain and you're not equipped to handle it, you're going to die. We find so many skiers each year upside down in tree welts, and I wish to God I didn't know what that kind of position does to a face. You don't rot in that kind of cold, you mummify or stay frozen. Most of them are screaming or biting the snow when they die. A little girl I found last winter was sucking her thumb. Sometimes they pull their hair out if they're in there long enough. One woman ripped off her false nails and took the real ones along with them. Don't know what she was trying to do. Sometimes we find climbers at the bottom of whatever face they've fallen down. They look fine until you try to move them, and then the bones click around inside. That's if you get to them before the cold and rigor set in. Otherwise, they're like big ice cubes. They get cold enough sometimes that if you touch them, your skin sticks. And then we find the ones that don't belong. I started putting them in a group in my head that I call the accidental stops. I think of the bodies I find as passengers on rides, and it helps me piece together how they end up where they do. These ones, they get off the ride too soon, and they end up in strange places. There was one case where a guy with 3 kids disappeared, left them behind in the woods. Luckily, we found them before anything happened, but we didn't find the guy until the next day. Now, I was in an area of the park that has a lot of ravines, these tricky little rock falls in places. I was climbing up one of the ravines, and in this tiny little space in the rocks, something shines when I get close to it. I backed up, I got my light in there, and sure enough, he is smashed up in there somehow. This guy, this big guy, folded himself into a 3 by 2 foot space, managed to disintegrate just about every bone in himself in the process. It's amazing how far the neck can stretch when the spine isn't there. Skin is much more elastic than you'd think. Holding his body was like trying to hold on to a very, very slippery beanbag. There was just nothing solid there anymore. A lot of the time, though, it's the kids who are accidentals. Little boys especially. Maybe they're the ones who wander off the most. They're the ones we find 2 feet under the bottom of a moving stream, dressed in the clothes they disappear in, cause of death undetermined. Or we find them 10 feet from where the searches began, curled up in a fern with the top half of their head and their nose removed. And when I say removed, I mean the way those scientists who slice off tiny pieces of brain do it. Perfect. Clean. A boy I knew went missing 3 years ago. He was so sweet. He came up every year with his troop to go camping in the summer. I used to go up to their campsite on the last night of the trip and tell scary stories to them. It was a lot of fun, and he was always very polite, and he would roast marshmallows for me. When he disappeared, he was only 14. He was a really, really good kid. He was actually one of the rare ones that goes missing at night. It's much more common for them to go missing during the day because that's when most of them are up and wandering around. My guess is that he went to go to the bathroom, and while he was out there, he noticed them and decided to go and investigate. Now, officially, he wandered off and got lost. That's the park's way of saying we have no fucking idea where your child is. And no idea where to even begin looking, if we're being completely honest, which we never are. I took the news very hard. I really wanted to be part of the team, and I had to fight hard to be included. Normally they restrict rangers who have any kind of relation to the missing person from searching, but in this case they made an exception because the area is largely mountainous, and that's what I do. I looked for him for weeks, and I hadn't found a single sign that he'd ever stepped out of the camp. Eventually I came back to the site and started over. I combed every inch. If I hadn't done that, I'd never have found him. He was very small by that point, you see. Just a soccer ball-sized ball of his torso left. Almost perfectly round. It included the curve of a lower rib and a tiny segment of his spine. The spinal cord itself was gone. I found it under a pile of dead pine needles. It was taken to the ME and tested and confirmed. I don't know what they told the parents, but it doesn't really matter. The casket was sealed before they even got there, and it would have been so very, very cruel to let them see the contents. Like Russell, I have a lot of friends in the service. The stress gets to you, and it's nice to have people who you can talk to about it. Every year, I try to meet up with my core group, Russell and 2 others, and we go out and camp in our secret spots during the fall. One year, we invited a couple others, 6 of us all in all, and actually rented a cabin out in the Smoky Mountains. It was one of the best years in memory. I don't think there was a single day that we spent more than a few hours sober, usually just enough to get into town and pick up food for me. I have to eat a lot because of a condition that popped up suddenly when I was a kid. We stayed for a week, and on the last night we were all a little low. I think we were all feeling the end of vacation blues. Pretty strong, in fact. Suddenly Mike, one of the non-regulars, pops his head up from his phone and looks out the window. "What's up?" I asked him. "I don't know. Something moved." "Go kill it, I'm hungry," I joked. He laughed and we forgot about it until I got up to get a small beer. The cabin didn't have electricity, which is actually why we chose it, so the only light was the fire on the other side of the room. The interior was dark, and it's easy to see out or in at night, and I'm on my way to the cooler in the kitchen when I notice someone on the edge of the property making their way towards the cabin. They are dragging themselves along the ground, and I can see that something is really very wrong with their legs. I stand about 2 feet back from the window and watch while the others kept talking, completely unaware. The first thing I noticed was that he had no full clothing. The temperatures can drop very quickly during this season. Anyone out here is going to need at least a coat and hat, and that's if they plan to camp out. This guy, cargo shorts, tank top. There's no major roads anywhere near here, and the closest cabin is 5 miles away, so I know he hasn't had an accident and come for help. There's enough light coming from the windows that I can see he is very tan. He's dragging himself onto the property with his elbows. His hands are held up, and I can see that the fingers are all broken. They're bent and twisted, and when he shuffles forwards, they stay rigid. I know, of course, that I need to go and help this man, but I can't bring myself to do it. Too many things don't add up. I can't figure out where he would have come from, and as he gets closer, I can see there's no dirt on his clothes, and there's something wrong with those too, and I can't tell what it is until he not until he comes forward into the square of light under the window, and that's when I see it. There's no seams. There's no collar. There's no hemline. The fabric blends into his skin. The fabric seems to grow out of him, and when he moves, it doesn't bunch up or wrinkle. It's like his clothing is a part of him. Now, he's right below the windows now, and I can see that he's making this anguished face as if he's in pain and knows that I'm right there watching. He drags himself so close to the house that all I can see are his legs. And that's when I notice his legs. And the fact that they're stretched behind him in this long, long line all the way back to the tree line he has come from. Where the ankle should be, there's another calf, then another knee, and so on, all the way back at least 15 feet, and who the fuck knows how much further beyond that. Now, there's movement at my eye level, so I flinch backwards, and he is staring inside at me, and his face reminds me of the mask of tragedy. His mouth is wrenched down so far at the corners. His neck is stretched out. His head hangs from it upside down, like some kind of ripe fruit, and he looks at me from this bizarre position, with his head hanging off the side of his neck, his mouth wrenched open like that, and that's when I drop the bottles and I go to get the rifle out of the mudroom. Everyone reacts, and I ignore them, snugging the gun against my shoulder, but by the time I get back and get a good shot, he's gone. I decided to tell them I'd seen a big coyote. Not because I didn't think they'd believe me, but because I didn't want such a good visit to have to end that way. I have to leave this here for now, but since there's no time limit on posts here, I'll probably just update sporadically as I have time. I'll do my best to not let that be too infrequent. What do we think? Time for one more or not?
You gonna say hi to the raid?
Hello to the raid.
Everybody's very impressed that you didn't break stride as we were descended upon by the soup goblins.
Oh, it's always good to see the soup goblins. How's everyone doing? Hope everyone's doing okay.
So, yes, everybody, apologies for spamming them, but Search and Rescue has really rather serious content warnings. So, please do step away if this is not what you need. Don't worry, we will be giving you something lighthearted and fun to end the evening with, so you will not be going to bed directly after hearing all the scary stories. But if any of these content warnings for body horror, descriptions of corpses and mutilation, or the death of children bother you, this is an excellent time to step away.
We've got one of the three left. One is really short, so let's do that.
All right, so let's do one more, and then we're going to take a little break, and then we have a heck of a shenanigan for you.
The Nameless Dark, story number 2. This is the only one marked as Search and Rescue. Landslides are common here in the early spring, and that means extra policing of the trails and backwoods areas where we know people go. Most of the time we'll send out a few helicopters, but about 3 years ago we went massively over budget after a fire in the main lodge, and we couldn't afford to bring them out. This meant we had to go in by foot. KD and I teamed up and headed out to the southwest, which is mostly mountainous, a couple of small rivers. Essentially, we got paid to go out and camp for a week. It was great. If we found a landslide, excellent. If not, excellent. Either way, we come out on top. Now, we're both fast in the woods, and we made great time. Our designated quadrant was about 15 miles from the trailhead, relatively close, but not frequently used due to the steep incline. Both of us are familiar with the area, and we were in good spirits. We camped out about a mile from our target to eat dinner and turn in early. This was back when I still slept relatively well, so I fell asleep with no real issue. Katie said it took her about 5 minutes to wake me up. She was crouched over my bag with her hair in all directions and her eyes slightly unfocused. Stop, I said, pushing her hands away. Stop, get off me. She blinked and frowned. Something's yelling, she mumbled. You got the blinker? I didn't understand what she wanted, so I tried to tell her she was sleepwalking, but she insisted on the blinker. She made a sweeping motion with her hand. Flashlight? Dog? What? I asked. I pointed at the bag by the fire pit. She dug through it. What? What is it? I don't know, she said. She pushed her bag to the side and turned the light on the ground. Has something got in there? She shook her head. I don't know. It was weird. Well, what do you want to do? She kept the flashlight trained on the ground. I don't know. Oh, Jesus. Go to sleep, I said. She blinked a few times, dragged her bag back. She kept the flashlight on, but I was tired, and I shut my eyes, and I'm not sure if I fell asleep or not, but Katie was shaking me again, and this time she was awake. What? Listen, she said. From somewhere close by, we heard a very strange sound. I heard it in the very back of my ear, and if I even breathed too loudly, I drowned it out. I cocked my head to try and figure out where it was coming from, but it was coming from all directions. A kind of distant, intermittent tone that I wasn't able to identify. What the fuck's that? I said. No idea, she whispered, looking over her shoulder, but I've been hearing it for an hour, and it's not going away, and it's not coming closer. What do you think? I asked. I have no idea. We sat on my bag and listened to the sound. I got up and walked in a wide circle around the camp. It was almost impossible to tell, but I began to suspect that the sound was getting louder when I passed by the north end. Katie got up and grabbed the light, and I took my rifle off my pack. The sky was clear, so there was a good amount of light, and from all around us we could hear deer. Now, 9 times out of 10, the mysterious rustling visitors you get here at night are deer. Every so often, the beam of the flashlight passed over a set of eyes low to the ground, and I cut them a wide berth. The females aren't generally aggressive, but the males are assholes, especially in the early spring. We'd gone maybe a quarter of a mile, and the sound was definitely getting louder. We started to call out, and the sound seemed to respond. We started to jog, and the beam of her flashlight bounced off the trunks of the trees. We jogged faster. The sound got louder. It was a man's voice, and it was coming from somewhere above us. We called out, identified ourselves as rangers, but the voice stayed constant, a wordless, muffled wailing. The sound got a little louder, and Katie made a hard right, slowing down fast enough that I almost ran into her. The sound was right there, right in front of us, but I couldn't see anything. I dropped down and felt along the ground, put my ear to it, but it just wasn't there. I spun in a circle, calling out, and then Katie grabbed my arm. Russ? She said. What is that? She was pointing at something on a large boulder, about 10 feet from us. The flashlight bleed whitewashed the surface, and I adjusted the beam. Something on the boulder was moving slightly. Something small and pale. It wiggled as I walked forward, and the sound continued to get louder. Whatever this was, it was firmly embedded in the rock. Nothing about it was familiar, and I was curious. I picked up a stick and poked it, very gently. It responded but didn't move away. I leaned forward slowly and carefully, my hands near my face in case the thing had some kind of spray defense. Something on the back of the pale thing caught the light for a brief moment. Something came together, and I moved away very slowly. Katie watched me with wide eyes, and I stood in front of her, squinting into the light. What is it? She asked. I turned and looked at it. Russ? I led her over and helped her get a closer look. She reacted to the sound, flinched away when she saw the back of the thing. She fell on her butt and scooted away, her eyes wide. We have to get it open, I said. We need to. We looked at the boulder where the sound was still coming from, and where the tip of the man's finger wiggled. We searched the surface, took rocks, rang them against the sides. The screaming got louder. We yelled at each other and pounded on the boulder, and neither of us would leave to get help, and the man screamed and screamed and screamed from inside it, and I kept turning to the rifle, even though I knew it wouldn't help, and I pounded the surface with my fists, and I thought about cubic inches and how much the man was screaming. And I told him to conserve his air, and all he would do was scream, and when we realized there was nothing we could do, we sat with him until the next afternoon, when the screaming finally stopped and the finger was still. We packed up camp and kept going to the target area. We spent days searching the land. On our way out, we passed by the boulder, and the finger was gone. The rock around it clawed and chipped. I haven't really thought about it much ever since.